these people are playing the comparison game, and you never win when you do that.
There's probably a lot of things that people will say is an emergency that really isn't.
That's what like trying hard really looks like, in my opinion.
They're playing that game where they're paying off their credit card to just put more on it. Welcome to Just Another Money podcast with your hosts, Lauren and Nick. We're here to take real-world money situations and break them down into actionable steps you can actually use.
Whether you're budgeting, paying off debt, or saving for your future, we're all about making finances easy to understand and putting you in control of your money. Hey everyone, and welcome back to today's episode where we're talking all things savings. From building up an emergency fund to saving for multiple goals at once, we're going to be diving into some real situations from people who are having a hard time building up their savings. But before we get into that, Lauren and I thought it'd be fun to share a savings goal that we're each working towards and how we're making progress with it. So Lauren, do you want to kick things off and share a goal that you and your husband have been saving towards?
Yeah, absolutely. So something that I'm currently saving for is helping my mom put a new deck on her house. So one of the ways that I live my rich life is helping, others with money if needed, financially. So that's why something like this is one of my savings goals. Something else we're saving for, my husband and I is a down payment for a home in the future. We just sold ours. We had a home and then we just sold ours. We moved from Pittsburgh to Chicago and we are currently renting. So that is now a new goal of ours because we didn't have that, a few months ago as we owned a home. So we got some money from our home equity and then we've just been adding to that. So when the time comes, we'll be able to put a down payment on a home. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, we're kind of in a similar boat. So the main savings goal that my wife and I have been saving towards has been buying our first home, actually. So I know you're moving on to your second one and we're trying to get into our first home. Yeah. And we set this goal probably about 3 years ago, which was before we were even married. And, we both agreed that this was something we wanted to do. So we started saving for it separately. And then when we got married, we combined that savings. But we decided that when we set this goal, we wanted to save enough money for about a 15 to 20% down payment, just because that's what felt right for us. Of course, enough money for the closing costs, some basic renovations. And then because we are going to be moving out of state, we're going to be moving from California to Texas, actually, which we finally decided on a place and we're happy with it. We wanted to save up enough money to cover all the costs with moving there, because that is going to be quite a bit. But, I was kind of thinking about it. I was like, what really made like the biggest progress or the biggest difference for us in making progress towards this goal? And at first I was like, oh, well, it's definitely our savings rate or tightening up our budget. And I feel like, those are more of the technical aspects of it. But what really made the progress for us was honestly like learning how to say no. And we had to really identify, okay, what was important to us and what were the things that were going to help move the needle closer, and everything else, we had to start saying no to. And yeah, that meant saying no to things that maybe sounded fun or that we were interested in, but we still tried to make room to say yes to the things that were important to us. Or if there was something that we really wanted to do, those are the things we prioritized so that we could continue to make progress on this goal. And I'm really happy to say that in just a few short months, if everything goes according to plan, we'll be hitting our goal and ready to move now. So that's something we've been working towards. But yeah, why don't we jump into these first scenarios? So Lauren, do you want to jump into the next one?
Yeah, absolutely. So this first scenario says, what type of savings account should I put my money in? I have a savings account with about 30,000 in it and have been adding to it slowly. I'm not much of an investor, mostly because I don't know what to invest in and don't know much about investing. I also don't have a stable job as I'm a substitute teacher. I've been reading recently that there are some slight benefits to having your money in a savings account at specific banks. In my case, what's the best bank to save my money in?
Yeah, I think this person is definitely asking the right questions, and I think they probably have a little bit of a ways to go to learning, just learning more to ask better questions, right? In terms of what banks, I don't think there's necessarily a specific bank, but maybe a specific type of account that you're looking for. So, traditionally, I would say that a traditional savings account at a big bank, like a Wells Fargo or a Chase or Bank of America, those types of savings accounts really aren't going to give you much in terms of interest. It's something like 0.02% per year, on average, or it's something ridiculous. Whereas if you looked at a high yield savings account, which you could find at credit unions or brokerages or even some online banks like SoFi, those will tend to give you, especially like right now, while interest rates are really high, they're going to give you like 4 to 5%, which if you're just parking your money and you're just putting it into savings, like you might as well as opt for something that can give you that 4 or 5% as opposed to like the less than 1%. That was something that was like a big move, or it felt like a big move for me when I first started my journey, was like figuring out how to get into a high yield savings account. And it's honestly not as complicated as you think. There are banks that offer high yield savings accounts and there's banks that don't. And typically those bigger those brand names, they're not going to offer anything that's worth your time, really. I would look for either those online banks or sometimes like your brokerages. Like, for example, I use Vanguard. They have a high yield savings account, but there's tons of great options out there. And I would look at probably a high yield savings account. Right now, you can still find banks that are offering like 4 to 5%, but I do think that's going to start coming down. But still, something is better than nothing. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. What about you, Lauren?
Yeah, same thing. I think it's important to note that there's so many high yield savings out there. A few things I look for when searching for one. You want to make sure it's FDIC insured so that your money is safe. You also want to make sure it has a competitive interest rate. Look at all of them. If you Google high yield savings accounts, you're going to come up with a million on there. So just some things to look at: the interest rates, FDIC insured, and also make sure there are no fees associated with it. You should not have to have a minimum balance in there or pay any type of monthly fee on it. There's plenty of those accounts that have no fees associated. So make sure that you're looking at those. Now the second, this question was really, where should I put my savings? But I also dug a little bit deeper here because this person said something about investing too. And I want to make it known that your high yield savings account is not your investing. Don't put your investments in there. It's just something to park your emergency fund or other short-term savings goals that you have. This person also says that, their career is not very stable. So for them, before they start investing, I want to make sure this person has, I'm going to say 6+ months of expenses saved up for their emergency fund, just because their income is quite unstable. And if you're a substitute teacher, you're not needed all the time, right? So I'm going to lean towards, 6+ months of that emergency fund before you invest in anything else. I also want to make sure there's a plan for a stable job and career before you really start investing this money, just so you're safe if something were to go awry with the potential path that you're on. So that's the only thing I would add to it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like, if you're not in a very stable job or there's some flexibility or some fluctuation, I should say, in terms of the income that you're bringing in, like maybe leaning towards that. Like typically it's 3 to 6 months as an emergency fund. But if you're not in a stable position, I would lean more towards that 6 months, if not more, like you said. But I kind of have like this rule of thumb that I use for, this person mentioned, like, I'm not really good at investing, and you definitely need to get your bearings first before you start investing. But I do have this rule of thumb that I use for, should this money that I have sitting on the sideline, should this be in a high yield savings account, or should I put this into investments? And there's actually a study on this, like maybe I can link it below, that shows the probability of your money going up in value based on the number of years you have it in the market. And what I've found for me is that if I'm going to use this money in the next 1 to 3 years, like I'm not going to risk it in the market, because if I get to that 1, 2, or 3 year mark, there's really no like guaranteed way to know that the market's going to be up or down or whatever it is, right? So if I'm going to use this money in the next 1 to 3 years, I'm probably going to keep the majority of it in a high yield savings account. What I've found though that works for me is that if this money is going to be on the sidelines for 3 to 5 years on the low end, but even longer than that, then to me it's worth it to invest that money in something like a low cost ETF, something that tracks like the broad market, that's very reliable. And like I said, I'll link the study below, but it was something like, if you invest your money for any 5-year period in history, there's like a 90+% chance that you would have earned money as opposed to losing money. But if you go down to 1 to 3 years, it drops to like a 50 or 60% chance. And to me, like, it's not worth it for me to bet that money in the short term. But in the long term, I'm okay taking some of that risk on. So that's something I like to think about when it comes to my money. Like I look at, when am I going to use it? How am I going to use it? And that's going to kind of determine where I choose to park it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. So why don't we move on to the next one then? So this person wrote, I feel like we're not making any progress. My partner and I make a combined income of around $130,000 per year. We run our finances pretty tight, with the primary expenses each month being rent at $2,200, our other bills at $600, and groceries at $500. Any leftover money generally goes towards our savings accounts with a little bit of money for play, but no more than $100 per month. Despite this, it feels like we were getting nowhere. We were slowly saving for a down payment on our first house, but that's a real long-term goal. We'd love to save for a new car or go on a nice vacation, but things like that just seem so unachievable. I see so many others who are able to buy a house and new cars, and it's starting to get us down. It's conflicting because I know we're in a better spot than most, but it feels like we're not getting anywhere. How can we start making some real progress?
So my initial thoughts to this are, does this person have like wildly high expectations? Because if they are spending that little amount that they're saying and only $100 per month on play money, they should be saving a couple thousand per month, if they're running their numbers right. And so my initial thought is like, are they looking at, they want to be saving like tens of thousands quickly? Like how have they been saving for years? Or is this like they're 2 months in and now she's like, where are we at in our progress? I don't know. I'm a little confused here about why they think that they're not making progress if they are putting a couple thousand per month towards their goals. The second thing is the mindset here. You can tell by the way that they, ask this question. The mindset's not good. They're comparing. That's it. You can look out there, social media, especially in the times of social media, you can look out there and see anything you want. And you can make up a scenario you want. Oh, they must have more money than us. They must be better at saving than us. When really they could just be drowning in debt and have way bigger payments than you. So I think that they need to stop comparing, and they also need to get real with their numbers. If you're making $130,000 per year and you are saving a couple thousand per month, like I think you're alluding to here, then you're making the progress that you need. It's realistic progress. You're not going to be saving $100,000 in just a few months, for all of these things. Like take it slow. Pick a few goals to focus on and go at it, but stop focusing on other people, because we could compare all day and you're never going to win when you're comparing to other people. That's my initial thought here.
Yeah, that's honestly exactly where my mind went to. Like these people are playing the comparison game and you never win when you do that. Like there's always going to be someone who's better off than you. There's always going to be someone who's worse off than you. But like you said, like you could see someone in a fancy house or a nice car and like, you have no clue what it looks like behind the scenes. Like they may look like they're living wealthy, but like they could be drowning in debt or be completely broke. But like, yeah, I think you really have to identify what the primary focus is. Like you said, you want to buy a home, but you also said you want to do this vacation. You want to get a new car. Like those are all huge expenses, right? Like a nice vacation could be like 10 grand. A new car could be like 30, 40, 50 grand. And a home, like a down payment on a home could be anywhere from like, 30,000 to 100,000. Like these are big savings goals. And I think you gotta be okay with them taking time. But, I was kind of looking at the numbers, and this person said that they make $130,000 per year. And now I don't know what their tax situation is, what tax or what state they live in, and if they pay state income taxes, but like that's $11,000, about $11,000 per month before taxes. Now, if you take off maybe 25% of that, like they should be bringing home like somewhere around $8,000. And it sounds like all their expenses add up to less than half of that. So like they should be making some pretty meaningful progress every month. Like if they're able to save half of their income, $4,000 a month, like in a year, they're going to save almost 50 grand. Like that's huge. And so I really think you kind of have to, like you said, get realistic with it, right? Look, how much are you actually saving per month? And then you can start to make a timeline. Like, okay, if you want to save for all three of those, maybe those are your top three financial goals. Like how much do you need to save for each of them? And based on how much you can save per month, how long is it going to take you to get to that? I feel like the numbers are there. Like maybe they're just not satisfied with the progress because they're playing the comparison game,
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's another important point, to celebrate the small wins, even though these seem like pretty big wins here if you're saving half your income. So I think it's important to just focus on yourself and, celebrate what you've done so far. Let's jump into the next situation here. So this one says, can you explain a sinking fund, when it's worth it and how it helps?
Yeah. So, I think a sinking fund sounds like it's this big fancy financial term, but it's really just like a savings plan. Like you know how much you want to save, and it's for a specific thing, and you know how long you have, so you can kind of break that up into the number of months. So as a quick example, like let's say in a year you wanted to spend $1,200 to go on a trip. right? And you know, because that's 12 months away, if you saved $100 per month, you set that money aside in a big pile, that in a year, you're going to have that $1,200. And that's really when a sinking fund, or how a sinking fund works. And now, when is it worth it? If you have a specific goal in mind and you want to set money aside for that, so that when the opportunity comes up, you have the money for it, like that's when it's really useful. But it can also be useful if you have something like maybe like those irregular expenses that pop up throughout the year that you know they're going to come up, and maybe it's once or twice a year, but you don't want to be caught when it's time to pay it and you haven't actually set any money aside for it. So that could also be a really good opportunity to use a savings a sinking fund.
Yeah. A good example, I think, and that I help a lot of clients with is, a lot of people pay their car insurance either like yearly or like twice a year. So a lot of people will take that number. So let's say it's $600 for 6 months. And you would take that and just divide it into the 6. So you'd be saving $100 each month, and you could set up an automation if you want, right into your savings account, put it into your high yield savings account. And then when you get to that point where you need to pay your insurance, you just pull it out of your high yield savings account, and you don't have to like stress like, oh no, I didn't have that money ready. I don't have $600 this month, to spend on it. So I think that's a really good place for a sinking fund. I also like sinking funds that aren't necessarily a specific goal. Like we have one for a travel fund. I feel like travel funds always get depleted because then you go on a trip and it's suddenly down. So if you just put something in there consistently each month, then you have that money to spend when you need to use it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. My wife and I, we tend to use like a general sinking fund that we use to cover like a wide range of things. And the reason I like doing that is because we have built into our monthly budget just like one line item where it says, hey, we're going to add maybe $200 a month into this general sinking fund. It's going to cover things like if we need to get an oil change, or if we need to buy like a random thing for the house that we don't necessarily, it's not working its way into our budget because it's kind of irregular. And instead we just have been setting money aside consistently for whenever those purchases come up. But I really do like the sinking fund in the sense that like, you can include that if you break it down by the numbers, you can include that into your monthly budget. And it really helps make those bigger savings goals. Like you said, like if you have to pay $600 at a time for your car insurance, like that's a pretty big amount to pay all at once. And if you're not saving for that consistently, that can really throw off your budget one month. But instead, you can add $100 per month into your budget, and it just makes things a lot smoother and a lot more manageable if you're saving for something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So let's jump into the next one. So this one I thought was kind of funny. It almost felt like this person, maybe not felt like it. I think this person was just a little upset with hearing about emergency funds. So this person wrote, why do people act like an emergency fund is some magical thing that will never be touched and will actually cover your emergencies? Sometimes it feels like an emergency fund is only 50% truth and 50% a concept that the wealthy use as an excuse to say that a person who is struggling more just needs to manage their money better. No one can realistically resolve their emergencies with this magical $1,000 that sits in their account and somehow rarely gets spent. Oftentimes, I have perpetual emergencies that if I had more money, I'd be paying to help resolve, and they definitely amount to far more than just $1,000. Sure, keeping extra money so you don't overdraw your account is good, but keeping an extra $1,000 for the purpose of emergencies as if that money doesn't already have a high priority somewhere else seems nonsensical in my experience. I might as well as pay a bit off my credit card now so that I have more money to spend on it later if I need to. That way I at least save myself money and interest. Does anyone else feel like this?
No, I don't feel like this. This person seems to... they just seem to be in a bad cycle. I feel they're playing that game where they're paying off their credit card to just put more on it, when really they should start saving up for an emergency fund to use it for strict emergencies so they don't need to go into credit card debt. I think this person probably has emergencies, quote unquote emergencies, more than others. So what are they saying is an emergency here? For me, like we don't touch our emergency fund. Like it's very rare. We actually had, I think I remember one time we had to use it. We had a random leak in our garage and we had to call an emergency plumber on like a holiday weekend. And that was $1,000 right there. Nice. But other things like something I need, or unless it's a true emergency that I need help with immediately, I'm not going to spend this money on it. So I think that the person needs to change their mindset about what is a true emergency. Like there's probably a lot of things that people will say is an emergency that really isn't. So that's my first thought there is just they need to change their mindset around what an emergency is and get out of that credit card cycle because they're never going to get out of it if they keep doing that. So.
Yeah, I mean, this one kind of made me upset reading it because they're like it's some magical thing, or it's like this concept of the wealthy to say that you're not managing your money better. I'm like, if this person wrote that they're having these perpetual emergencies, and I feel like if you're having perpetual emergencies at a certain point, like they're not emergencies if they keep happening on a regular basis. Like at that point, it really kind of just is a result of poor planning. Like if you know that these things are going to happen and maybe you don't know the exact date, but you know they happen frequent enough, like you should be setting aside money for that. Like, I don't know. To me, like an emergency fund, like you said, is for a really specific case. Like if you really have to use it. And even then, like if you have an emergency and you can somehow like tweak the budget so that you don't necessarily have to pull from it, like that's going to be really good because maybe only that month will suck instead of having to rebuild up your emergency fund over the next few months. But like, I don't know. I definitely don't think that an emergency fund is like some concept for the wealthy. I think it's something that everyone should have in place. And I feel like if you don't have an emergency fund, that's like your first emergency right there, is you need to build up some money, because otherwise, like this person said, they're just going to put that on a credit card. They're going to stay in this cycle of, well, I should just pay off my credit card so I can use that for emergencies, because credit card companies are known for being your best friend and charging you only 30% interest on your emergencies. Like, I don't know. To me, it just, that's one, not the way you use an emergency fund, but also not the way I would suggest using a credit card.
Yeah, no. And I also, in this scenario, they're very mad about the $1,000 emergency fund. And I believe this comes from, Dave Ramsey talking about having your $1,000 starter emergency fund. People miss that starter. You can make it whatever you want. It doesn't have to be $1,000. I know that's a small amount, but for some people that is life-changing, Yeah. That is a big amount for some people. So that's a goal to get to, but ultimately you do want to have like 3 to 6 months of expenses in there. So stop focusing so much on that $1,000 number.
Yeah. I mean, I was like when I first got into like finances and my financial journey, like I was like a hardcore Dave Ramsey fan. And I was like, no, it has to be $1,000 when you're paying off debt. And like, that's a lot of the criticism that he gets, is like $1,000 isn't going to cover much. And it, you always hear like, well, it was never meant to cover enough. I'm like, well, I think a true emergency fund, whether you're in debt or not, should be enough to cover like an average emergency. And so I always like to tell people, if you're in debt, like focus on 1 month of savings for your expenses as your starter emergency fund. And I think for most people, that's going to fall like on the low end, maybe $2,000, and on the high end, like $4,000. But that's going to cover like a huge range of emergencies, or if you need to pay a deductible or something, but at least you have a bigger chunk of money. It's also going to just feel safer to have that money parked on the side so that you can continue, if you're in debt, you can continue that plan if something comes up, but it's just going to cover a lot more. But yeah, I think this person is probably just stuck in this cycle of like, life is really sucking right now, and I have to keep putting things on credit cards, and it feels like everyone else is doing better than me. And so all these concepts, like, it's not because I'm not working hard, which I feel like this person probably is working hard. They're maybe just working against themselves by putting money on, or putting charges on credit cards and putting themselves deeper in debt. Like, I don't think the things that they're doing aren't necessarily working for them, and they're working against them. And I think if they made probably just a few slight tweaks to how they're approaching their emergency fund, how they're approaching credit cards, they would probably see a huge improvement from that. So I don't know. That's what I'm thinking about it.
Yep, absolutely. Well, let's jump into the next one here. So this one says, I can't seem to save money no matter how hard I try. Hi, I'm 19 years old and just started working for the first time in my life, but I just can't seem to save money. I live at home with my parents and don't pay rent, so I should be able to save. I make about $2,800 per month, and I'm always left with $500 in my savings by the end of it. I'm just really frustrated because my mom is disappointed about it too, and I want to be able to save on my own. Has anyone else dealt with this? Please help.
Yeah, I mean, if you're living at home and you're making $2,800 a month, and like all you have left is the same $500 that you started with, like, I don't know what there is to be disappointed or frustrated about. Like, you're clearly just spending it all. Like, and you're obviously not budgeting, which that's okay if like, you are where you are, but like, if you're starting to get frustrated about this, I think you really got to start budgeting, because your money's going somewhere. And if you're living at home, you don't really have any expenses. So like, this person's 19. Like, honestly, it's probably going towards like hanging out with friends or going out to eat or buying things that they want. And it's always those like little paper cuts that over time, over the course of a month, like they'll eat up $2,800. And I feel like that's probably the trap that this person's falling into, where it's like, I really don't ever spend that much. And their average purchase is probably not like here's $1,000 here or $500 here. It's probably like those 10 to 20 or $30 purchases again and again and again every single day. And before they know it, they have $0 left over. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like they're kind of falling into that trap, you know?
Oh, for sure. And, you know, be honest with yourself. Are you actually trying hard? Like, what does that mean? You know what I mean? But I think the biggest thing is that I noticed here, it says I'm always left with 500. So my best like savings advice is always to plan it out at the beginning of the month. You never want to count on what you have left over to be your savings goals, because you're going to spend it all. You know, you're going to go out to eat, you're going to spend random money at Target. So have those savings goals planned out first and then kind of spend what's left. Like this person needs to get on a budget and they should, you know, they're young. I love that they're asking this question at 19. You know, I wish I would have asked these questions at 19, you know, but they can budget out like meals with friends or, you know, fun money that they want, but also having those savings goals. If you're living at home making almost $3,000 per month at 19, that's pretty good. And you could get pretty far ahead financially if you can just get your expenses under control and have a plan to do so.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, this person is young and there's definitely some grace in that. And they said this is the first time they're working, probably the first time that they're really starting to understand the value of money. And I feel like if they're not creating a plan for their money yet, like that's the very first thing you need to do. Like you said, you should definitely just like write down your list of priorities. And it doesn't have to be like this strict budget if that's not something you're comfortable with doing yet. Like what is some money that I want to have saved at the end of each month? And then what's left over for me to spend? I think just approaching it very simply, like, here's how much I want to save from this $2,800. Here's what I think is reasonable. And here's how much I can reasonably spend on going out with friends. And it's going to take some trial and error, but like, yeah, like you said, like, I don't think you're really trying that hard because, you know, clearly this money's going somewhere. Like open up your bank account, open up the app on your phone and just see like, what are all the transactions? Like I guarantee you it's probably things that like they could have gone without. And I'm sure it's to have fun, to hang out with friends or whatever it is. But if you're frustrated with the progress you're making, that's what you got to do. Like, I'm not saying you have to do it, right? Like if you wanted to spend all your money, like by all means, like you absolutely should. But if you're frustrated with not making any progress, then that you got to kind of flip around and you got to understand that you got to create a budget first. You got to outline, what do I want to save? How much am I okay spending? That's what like trying hard really looks like, in my opinion. Yeah,
absolutely. And if this person at 19 gets this all figured out, they're going to have a bright financial future, which is amazing.
Yeah. I mean, $2,800 at 19 is like not bad, you know, like
it's really good.
Yeah. Like if you just set aside a reasonable amount, you could max out your Roth IRA each month. Like you could, you know, you can start making some real progress on your goals and still like, even if this person saved half of their money and spent the other half, like they're going to be left with like over $10,000 by the end of the year. Like that's really awesome. So, I feel like they're probably trying hard in the sense that they're really thinking about it a lot, but they're not really putting any plan to paper and actually following it. So that's what I would say is like my biggest recommendation is put a plan down on paper.
Yep. Same.
Cool. So let's move into this last one. So this person wrote, how much of your income should you really save? I'm 22 with zero debt and about to start earning my first income. I realize that although I know I'm supposed to save, I have no idea how much of that income should go into a savings account. Also, how much of that should go into investments like an index fund, which I've heard is a good place to start with if you want to start creating long-term savings. Is 25% really it? Is saving more advisable or encouraged? For context, my dad pays for pretty much all of my living expenses and will continue to do so even once I start earning an income. Yes, I know I'm very lucky, very grateful, and very much an only child. To me, it makes sense to try and save as much as possible to make the most of it, but I'm not sure if that's just good financial advice. What do you think?
Yeah, this is another young person that's asking some good questions. That's really great that their dad pays for everything. That's a blessing. So my first thought is, first off, do they have any savings at all? I don't know. I don't think this person really says, but my first thought is, set up some goals for yourself. do you have an emergency fund? How much do you want to save for that? Do you have something else you're saving for, a car or, a vacation or whatever? Set up goals for that. Because I think you have a really awesome opportunity here to have no expenses basically and have your first income coming in. So really get ahead financially and then start investing. So typically it's, the advice is usually like 15% if you can. But if this person literally has no expenses, I wouldn't mind them doing more to get ahead, because I'm assuming that dad is not going to continue to pay all of living expenses forever. So build your emergency fund now, save for whatever you need to save for, and then start investing young. Because later on you may not be able to invest as much as you are right now. So that's my initial thought hearing this, but curious what you have to say about it.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I thought was if you're asking these questions at 22, you're on the right track. And I do think that's a good place to start. And I also don't think there's anything wrong with if a parent is in a good financial position, supporting their kid. My concern on the kid side is that if you're 22 years old, you are an adult, you are earning your first income. Again, nothing wrong with parents helping if they can afford it. But the the issue comes up when you start to rely on that support from your parents and you start to inflate your lifestyle to fit into this, I have no expenses, I have all this extra income. And then inevitably when your dad stops paying for you because maybe you've reached a certain age or they're in a different financial position, you're left with these overinflated lifestyle payments that you have to continue making. And now it's going to be a lot of work to get you back down to something that's reasonable. And not only a lot of work in terms of just the numbers, but a lot of work and you have to change a lot of your habits. If you're used to spending $500, $600, $700 going out each month because you can actually afford it right now with no expenses, when you have to cut down to $100 or $200 a month, that's a huge lifestyle change. That means going from going out Friday, Saturday, Sunday night to just maybe going out a few times a month, that's a big change. And that would be kind of the only concern I have. If you're going to support a child, are you stunting their growth? Are you allowing them to fall into this trap of I have no expenses, I can just spend all my money. And then when they do have expenses, they don't know how to actually deal with it. But on the flip side of that, if you're the kid in this situation, you're 22 years old, don't take it for granted and start making a plan. What would you actually have to put towards rent in your area? Maybe you can say that's how much I want to start saving so that when I have to start paying rent, I'm used to putting that money aside every single month. That's kind of my initial thought in terms of it's really awesome that your dad's paying for it, but I wouldn't let it stop you from being able to grow into this income,
Yeah, absolutely. The best advice I have here is to use this situation right now to your advantage and don't blow it all on going out or whatever. Use it for savings if you can. Maybe you want to save for a house or something. You have a lot of income here to be able to do that with.
Yeah. I think in terms of a financial roadmap for this person, whether you're living at home or not, I think you should be focused on saving up an emergency fund. And, typically we say 3 to 6 months of expenses as your emergency fund. And if you have zero expenses, 3 to 6 months of nothing is nothing. So I would look at your area and see what would 3 to 6 months of expenses cost in my area or wherever I want to live as a good marker of how much you need to save so that when you do kind of go out on your own, you can grow into that emergency fund that you've started to build. I think that would be a really good place to start. And then if you have the extra money on a monthly basis, which it sounds like you probably will, is to start investing for retirement. I don't think you're ever too young to start investing for retirement. 22, you have so much time behind you that you should really take advantage of it and start investing now. And that way you've already built up that habit for when you do have other expenses starting to be introduced into your life. Now investing for retirement is just another thing that you're already comfortable doing. It's almost as if it's just another bill that you have to pay each month is here's how much goes into my retirement accounts. You're comfortable doing it. I would start doing that as early as possible. Lauren, what do you think would be maybe the next thing that they should do after they've started to save for an emergency fund or started to invest for retirement? Do you think what do you think would be the next step for them?
Honestly, I just had the thought in my head as we were sitting here. One of the things I think that he should probably have a conversation with his dad to find out how long this situation is going to last. Now, I understand this person is 22, so it's a little bit uncomfortable to maybe have that type of conversation with your parent, but that was what was circulating my head. I'm like, maybe he or whoever this is should have a conversation with their dad and say, hey, like, I am really appreciative of the situation. Like, what does that look like in the future? Is this going to change when I move out? I don't know if this person's living at home or not, but when I move out, are they going to continue to pay this, or is this going to be up when I'm 27 or whatever, just so this person can have a good understanding of what's next? Because I guess the next, thing for them to do would be to determine that and then see what their goals would be. Say dad's going to cut them off at like 27, then maybe they start saving for down payment on an apartment or something, a car or whatever financial goals they have, to get that done before they have to start, providing for themselves. I don't know. That was just like something that I had to like say, because it was in my mind. So just what I thought about there.
Yeah, I think, and I feel like it might be a little awkward to bring that up to your dad. Like, if he's kind of paying for your way right now, like, hey, how long are you planning on doing it? I think there's like a graceful way you can go approach your dad and be like, hey, like, I'm really appreciative of everything that you've been doing for me. And I want to make sure that I'm using this time appropriately, that I'm not like taking advantage of the situation. And I want to start planning ahead. So like, how long do you think you'd be comfortable doing this, so I can plan to make sure that I can live on my own whenever you're ready to stop doing that? But yeah, like you said, I feel like after that, after they have these conversations, they started saving for their emergency fund and maybe retirement. I would look at what is like the next biggest thing in your life that's going to come into play. So, you're young, maybe you don't have a car yet, or you don't have like your own car. Is that something that you're going to need to buy when you move out on your own, or you're on your own and not, your dad's not helping pay for your expenses? Cool. Then you can start to save up for that, so it's not such a huge burden in the future. Maybe you don't have to get a car loan. You could just pay in cash for it. Or what other goals do you have? Like you said, like maybe they're saving up for a down payment to move into an apartment, for that security deposit, or even if, hey, maybe they could stay in this situation for a few years and they could save up, and the next place they move is into their first home. Like, I really think you should take advantage of the situation and make sure not to take advantage in the wrong way and just blow all that money just because you can right now. And instead take advantage of it, which I'm sure is how your dad wants you to use it, is I have the flexibility to save a ton of my money right now. Like, maybe I'm saving like 50 to 70% of my income, still able to go out and have fun, but I'm really using this opportunity to set me up for the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Before we wrap things up, we did want to share this statistic, and it's one that I've seen circulating around recently. And so this statistic says that over 1 in 4 people have no emergency savings. And this article was published by Bankrate. We'll link that down below as well. But it shows that 27% of U.S. adults have no emergency savings at all, which is the highest amount since they started surveying this in 2020. And here's the breakup of the data by generation. So 29% of Gen Z have zero emergency savings, 34% of millennials, 31% of Gen X, and 16% of baby boomers. And it also goes on to say that 59% of Americans are uncomfortable with their amount of savings that they have. So, Lauren, question to you, what would you say, or what would you recommend to someone who's in this situation where they either have no savings at all, or they're in a place where they're just not comfortable with the amount of savings that they do have?
Yeah, so I think that this needs to be a number one priority. We know that emergencies are going to happen. It's not when, or it's not like if, it's when it's going to happen, right? So I would cut like all discretionary spending. Really buckle down during this time. It's not going to take long. If you really got serious about it, cut your discretionary spending and build up your emergency fund. Maybe try to sell some things. Get really creative about it. I've had people that I've worked with in the past who have sold like stuff on the Facebook marketplace, or had yard sales, or got a part-time job temporarily just so they could get their emergency fund in place. Or even with some discipline, I think people can make a lot happen with their primary income, but you have to want to do it. So change a few things and get that emergency fund set up. Even if you're just starting with a starter one to, protect yourself from little emergencies or bumps in the road, and then work on building it up bigger in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned the emergency fund. And I think I said it earlier, but if you don't have an emergency fund, like that is an emergency, and you're literally just one bad day away from falling into debt, or if you're in a bad situation already, to falling into more debt. So I would really focus, like you said, on building up that emergency fund. And in terms of like looking at how much should I start to save, I would say let's write down what all of your expenses are for the month and start to look at what are my basic necessities. So things like housing, food, transportation, utilities, And then what are some other important bills that I have throughout the month? Maybe that's like your minimum payments on any debts or your phone bills or internet, or if you have to pay for childcare, like what does that amount to on a monthly basis? That should be your first goal for how much you're saving. And in terms of how to actually do that, like if you're not tracking your spending, I think that's the first place anyone should start. I think you'd be surprised with how much money you're wasting on a monthly basis just on these little expenses. And like we talked about in one of the scenarios earlier, it's always those little like paper cut expenses of, oh, I spent, $5 today getting coffee from Starbucks, or I ordered DoorDash instead of just going and picking up. And so that cost me an extra $10 or $15 on top of the meal. Like it's these little things that if you do those consistently and you just kind of get into the habit of doing them, that's where you can really start to feel like you're not able to make any progress, because it's like, I'm not spending money on these big grand things, but it's the little paper cuts that death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? Like all these little expenses add up. And if you do them enough, like you're going to be wasting tens of thousands of dollars every single year. So that's what I would say if you're in this situation where you just don't feel like you have any savings or you're not comfortable with the amount that you have saved. So anything else to add, Lauren?
Nope.
Cool. So I think that wraps it up for this episode. And simple ask, as always, if you found value from this episode, honestly, the best way that you can help us grow is by sharing this with a friend. And if you did enjoy the episode and you want to leave a review, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah. And if you want to have your money questions answered on the show, you can send us an email to justanothermoneypodcast@gmail.com or message us to our Instagrams, which will be linked below. And don't forget to join us for our next episode of Just Another Money Podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations provided on this podcast are for entertainment purposes only and do not constitute professional financial advice. Any financial decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are your responsibility. We strongly recommend consulting with a licensed financial advisor or other qualified professional before making any significant financial decisions. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that we are not liable for any financial outcomes.